اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you all. Jazakallah khair for taking out time and joining this study. Before we begin, just some kind of key points to highlight that this is a study, it's free-flowing, it's almost like a podcast style of studying fiqh, which means that there's no kind of expectations for anybody to be live in the class. It'll be 30 to 45 minutes long. You can hear it when you want, wherever you want, whilst you're walking, whilst you're doing your chores or whatever, however you want to benefit. Nobody is compelled to stay and benefit. Somebody feels that this is not for them, they're more than welcome not to continue. It's just I would say it's more like a study, a circle where those who have an interest in fiqh and who have an interest in discussing contemporary applications of fiqh, as well as understanding why the fuqaha said what they said, and just reading books of fiqh. It's more or less just a kind of a exploration of that, and that's all it'll be. We decided to go with Kitab al-Buyu, and inshallah that's what we'll begin with, and then we'll continue from there. The book that we've selected to read initially is al-Durr al-Mukhtar, which is on the screen, hopefully you can see. The way I'd like to do this is I will read and explain and bring in other conversations and discussions around the subject. And then those who have questions, if we have time at the end, we can always address those queries. Otherwise, feel free to use the Telegram group to ask your queries and have your discussions. I'm not promising that I'll answer all the questions because sometimes it gets difficult, but as many as I can respond to, inshallah, I'll try my best to. And yeah, that's about it, inshallah. So if there's anything else, feel free to ask in the group. But inshallah, we'll just commence with reading al-Durr al-Mukhtar. So something on the book before we actually begin. And it's good to understand, those who know me know Buyu is my personal favorite from all the abwab of fiqh. I've always had an interest in this area. And I just feel like the times that we live in require super specialization. That's my personal view, that in fiqh we need super specialization. What do I mean by that? I mean that fiqh is so complicated. Just like law or medicine that you see today, you don't have a surgeon who can operate on any part of the body, right? You'll have a neurosurgeon, a heart surgeon, and other types of surgeons. Likewise, you have lawyers who are experts in particular area. You'll have lawyers who are experts in tort law, or lawyers who are experts in criminal law, or lawyers who are expert in litigation. There's many areas of law, and each lawyer will specialize in that particular field and will only focus on that field. My personal inclination is something similar, whereby the more you read of fiqh, the more you kind of contemplate on fiqh, and the more you engage with fiqh, you begin to realize that although the law has patterns, right, the entirety of fiqh is based on patterns. The entirety of fiqh is based on principles underpinning what we read. And fiqh is very coherent. Fiqh is very coherent. Fiqh is not random. There's no randomness in anything. There's no randomness in the Quran, no randomness in the Sunnah, no randomness in fiqh. And fiqh is a produce of that, or a reflection of the Quran and Sunnah. So fiqh is an enterprise. I like to call it an enterprise because there's no randomness whatsoever in fiqh. It's very meticulous, it's very precise, it's a school, it's a system. It's been operating in a particular way for hundreds of years. And so what we have in front of us is an output of hundreds and thousands of people's labor, right, and work and effort. So fiqh is not random at all whatsoever. And so going back to my initial point, every chapter of fiqh, every bab of fiqh can be a specialism. A person can super specialize in a chapter of fiqh. That's how detailed every bab of fiqh is, every chapter of fiqh. No chapter of fiqh is simple. If we really want to understand fiqh properly and to implement it, not just to read theory, but to practice it, to kind of make it meaningful in our affairs today, to kind of guide people to relate the fiqh to people and let people relate to the fiqh, to have a dialogue between people and the books. This needs people who are specialists, because what we read in the books today and what we see today, it can seem as though there's a mismatch between what we're seeing and what we're reading. But in reality, that's not the case. But it's just that we haven't really dug deep or looked deeper and tried to understand fiqh at a deeper level. It's more or less superficial and very surface level kind of readings and understandings of fiqh without the kind of deep dive that is required to understand fiqh. So that's why I always encourage my students, encourage friends and colleagues to, those who are serious about fiqh, you specialize in an area of fiqh and excel in that area, because there's work needed in every single chapter of fiqh needs work. So whether you're a person of Ibadat, in Tahara, in Salah, or a person of Hayd, and you feel that this is the area you can specialize, or Zakat, or Sawm, or Hajj, all these chapters are, entire projects in and of themselves. You need a specialist on Hajj today. You need a specialist on Zakat today. You need a specialist on Sawm. Right? There's so much you can do in that one chapter. And then, of course, there's stuff like food, halal and haram food. That's an entire field of its own. Medicine is another whole area. Medical bioethics is another whole area. Finance and muamalat and buyu, it's a whole other field altogether. Likewise, inheritance, mirath, udhiyah, dhabiha. There's so much. So every chapter of fiqh is precious, it's valuable, it's deep. There's so much to it. And inshallah, throughout these studies, whether it takes us 10 years, 15 years, Allah knows best. But the idea is to have a very relaxed and easy read, easy discussion. Yeah, there will be technicalities, there'll be some deep things that we discuss, contemporary applications. But the idea is this can be something where you're walking and listening to, with your AirPods. It's simply, that's the idea of this, for those who have an interest in learning, reading, and engaging with fiqh. So that being said, al-Durr al-Mukhtar, the author is somebody called Muhammad ibn Ali, right, who's famously known as Alauddin al-Haskafi. Alauddin al-Haskafi, very famous. He was the Mufti of the Hanafis in Damascus. He was born in 1025 and he passes away in 1088. So the 11th century of Hijrah, which corresponds to 1616 to 1677. So 17th century from the kind of like a Gregorian English perspective. He was born in and passed away in Damascus. He has several books, a prolific writer, prolific in Nahw and grammar. He's got a Sharh on Qatr al-Nada. Then he's written also another fiqh book, which is a really, really, I would say, a very interesting book called al-Durr al-Muntaqa. It's a Sharh of Multaqa al-Abhur. This commentary has other names to it as well. It's known as Zadu Ahli Tuqa and Sukab al-Anhur. Mufti Mahmud al-Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala, the author of Fatwa Mahmudiyya, or whose the book is attributed to, his fatwa collated in there. Whenever he says, he quotes Sukab al-Anhur, he's quoting this al-Durr al-Muntaqa of al-Haskafi. Likewise, Sukab al-Anhur, there's another book in Mirath with that name, but he's referring to al-Durr al-Muntaqa. But to understand Durr al-Mukhtar, you have to understand, as you know, look, Durr al-Mukhtar is a commentary on another book. So what we're reading is actually a commentary of another book. What's that other book? That other book is Tanwir al-Absar, right? So you can see whenever it's bold in brackets, that's actually the matn, and the commentary that we're reading is the sharh of it. Okay, that matn and that text is called Tanwir al-Absar. That's by a faqih known as Shihabuddin at-Tumurtashi, rahimahullah ta'ala, who's also the Sheikh of Hanafiya. He was born and he passed away in Gaza, in Palestine. He was born in 939 and passed away in 1006 after Hijrah. So that's what the commentary is on. what makes Tanwir al-Absar so famous? What made this book? Why do people actually write commentaries on books? Right? What gave it such prominence? Okay, this is something we have to understand. What makes a book accepted? How does a book become accepted? Why would people write a commentary on a particular book? And what gives a book prominence and such that people work on it, people work with it, work on it, and teach it and continuously narrate it? There's many reasons. One is, of course, a primary input. Right? There's inputs that people do and the authors have. The primary one is, of course, the ta'alluq and connection a person has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that person's work barakah and legacy for them. Okay, the person's ikhlas, that's definitely a factor. These are factors, like in economics we say factors of production, the inputs to produce things. Likewise, a person's ikhlas and ta'alluq, these are also means to gain goodness in this world and the akhirah. Okay, then also the user-friendly nature, the kind of the positioning of the book. What I mean by that is, how is it positioned amongst other books? What did the author do to make it different? How did he present it to people? What were the resources like in spreading this work? These are all means and asbab. Similarly, the author's sihah in his naqal is dabt, right? How accurate were they? How the things that they discuss, how meticulously have the things been discussed in a particular book? That's what really makes a book rise and spread in various places. So Tanwir al-Absar is a reflection of all of that. And that's why the fuqaha, they really, like even Hasqifi rahimahullah, he mentions about Tanwir al-Absar itself, that one of the kind of the reasons why it has such prominence and such acceptance is because of its ikhtisar. It's easy to read, it's small. This tasheeh in there, he mentions aqwal which are sahih, and then the dabt and accuracy of reflecting the madhab is also in there. And Tumurtashi, the author of Tanwir al-Absar, what he did in Tanwir al-Absar is he gathered the masail of the mukhtasarat and the mutun mu'tamada, he put it all together in this one, cover to cover, this one book, small easy book to read, as a manual for the qudat and muftin. So this was the kind of like go-to manual for the qadi and the mufti to refer to when they were giving fatwa, okay, or when they were decreeing and doing the decree. However, Ibn Abidin rahimahullah and others have mentioned about Tanwir al-Absar that it's not at the same level of the mutun mu'tabara, like Quduri, the Mukhtasar from Quduri, the Bidayat al-Mubtadi, the Mukhtar, the Nuqaya, Wiqaya, and Kanz, and also the Multaqa. It's not on the same level because the mutun mu'tabara that we have, okay, in our madhab, the original purpose of them is to naql al-madhab. Their job is to kind of retain the madhab and the view of Imam Abu Hanifa and his companions, and to kind of preserve the original kind of the zahir riwayah, what we say. Yeah, the things will be different. The way like Kanz is different to Quduri, there's more masail in Kanz, but there's ikhtisar. So the books differ in the way they present zahir riwayah, but essentially they're maintaining, preserving the original law, which was compiled by our imams and the founders of the madhab. Another thing about Tanwir al-Absar which differentiates it, doesn't make it like the mutun, is that it has fatawa in it also. So fatawa and nawazil, the views of others and contemporaries, not many, but some contemporary issues here and there. And that's why it takes it away from the kind of like same level and standing of these famous mutun madhab. There are some masail in Tanwir al-Absar and even Durr al-Mukhtar which are mukhalif to a jumhur, or you'd say not the kind of like the correct view in the madhab, but that can be highlighted here and there as we go along. So that's Tanwir al-Absar, very famous. He was accepted for all these reasons. Now comes our book, al-Durr al-Mukhtar. Durr al-Mukhtar, Imam Haskafi rahimahullah ta'ala radiya an, he started a detailed sharh called Khazain al-Asrar. That he was working, writing. It almost took 10 volumes or so, and he reached Babul Nawafil, right? Or Babul Witr wa Nawafil. But then what he did is he condensed this particular work and he started writing Durr al-Mukhtar. Of course, if you're writing a huge sharh, that's why some fuqaha and some scholars, what they would do is they wouldn't start from the beginning of the kitab. So there are some fuqaha, when they've written some books, they've actually started from the middle and they've passed away halfway of writing the book. So they started from the middle, they went to the end, then they begin from the starting of Tahara and they carry on. The reason why they did that was a trend that they would see, like scholars would come, they wouldn't finish the book and they'd pass away because it takes years to write this. This was their one legacy. And this also teaches us a lesson that there should be one work that you have in your life, which you spend 10, 15, 20 years on to make your legacy. Every one of us as a talibul ilm should have a legacy. Like, don't ever think low of yourself or don't think you can't do something which is pioneering or legacy building. Of course you can. It can take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it doesn't matter. But you have the intention, you have the plan, the intention, and do something, write something for the sake of Allah, and let it be your kind of like, dhikr salih after you pass away. Let it be your kind of survivor, so to speak. So whatever interest you have, whether it's Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, or anything else for that matter, anything to do with ilm, you should write. Nobody should, no scholar, or whether male, female, should abstain from writing. You should put the ilm that we have and we've studied, we've learned from our teachers in use and continue to transmit in any way, shape, or form, in any medium that we have. Right? You can write an e-book, you can write a physical book, hard copy. It doesn't matter. But we should all be contributing, doing something, and that's your personal journey. We're all on a personal journey. Writing builds you, it builds your mind, it builds your thinking, your analysis, your technical kind of like your technical skills. It builds you in so many different ways. Your patience, even the sifat ma'nawiyah, the kind of internal attributes, it builds them also. So everybody should have a project they're working on besides what they do for day to day, the khidmat and the teaching that one may be doing, or whatever other khidmah of deen somebody is doing. There should be something as part of ilm that you're writing, you're contributing, you're researching. That's where all the enjoyment is in ilm. It's in that research, it's in that writing, it's in that kind of reading 50 books on one mas'ala and one issue. That's really the kind of the enjoyment that is derived. And of course you don't do this for enjoyment purposes, but really there's an enjoyment in there when you're opening 50 books, 60 books just to find one thing. It's the journey itself is so sweet and so enjoyable that even though you may find the answer at the end, but the journey itself, every single second of it is just so. That's how manhuman la yashba'an, manhuman fil ilm, right? The famous narration. So you can never be satisfied. So we should all be continuously writing, like Imam al-Haskafi rahimahullah. So he wrote this book and he condensed Durr al-Mukhtar from there. And that's why today what we have in front of us is this particular book. Some of the, I would say, things to remember about the Durr, right? Some key attributes and just some things, notes about the book itself. The outstanding features. One, Imam al-Haskafi rahimahullah, he will typically always attribute to the source that he's quoting or whatever he's referencing. He'll always quote it, right? So there's a lot of referencing in there. He'll just mention one word like qunya, fath, right? Or another word. But he'll typically reference where he's quoting or what he's referring to. He indicates to khilaf here and there within the madhab. But very frequently he will tell you what the rajih is in the madhab. He will tell you this is a rajih, this is the mufta bihi, alayhi al-amal, alayhi al-fatwa, so and so forth. Very rarely will he discuss views of the four madhabs. He'll stick within if this is a Hanafi matan, he'll stick within there's a lot of khilaf amongst the Hanafi fuqaha to mention that, right? let alone the other madhahib. But the Hanafi fuqaha, that's the universe that we are traversing and exploring at the moment. So he will explain and he will talk about the ikhtilaf amongst the Hanafi fuqaha, but rarely will he touch upon the views of the other madhahib. And finally, I think many a time we'll mention like وَقَالَ شَيْخُنَا or هَكَذَا قَالَ شَيْخُنَا. When he says Shaykhuna, he's referring to Khairuddin al-Ramli rahimahullah ta'ala radiya an, who passes away in 1081 after Hijrah. That's his Shaykh, that's who he's referring to and referencing. So this is everything about al-Durr al-Mukhtar, which is worth noting. And I think that serves, inshallah, as sufficient as a, as an introduction to the kitab and to the author. And inshallah, we'll just start with Kitab al-Buyu'. So when we talk about Kitab al-Buyu', he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ورضي عنه لما فرغ من حقوق الله تعالى العبادات والعقوبات شرع في حقوق العباد المعاملات. He mentions, and I'm not going to translate this, we all know the translations here, but he makes a distinction between Ibadat, Uqubat, and then Muamalat. Okay, he mentions, and what's the distinction he's making? He's making a distinction in terms of Huquq. One is Huquq Allah, and the other is Huquq al-Ibad. These are the two distinctions, or the two kind of categories he presents to you. Why is he making this distinction? What's the point of this? It's to tell you that fiqh can be divided in almost two ways. The entirety of fiqh, this is one categorization. And fiqh can be sliced in many ways. This is one common slicing of fiqh and one kind of categorization where you have Huquq Allah and Huquq al-Ibad. The question is, what makes something Huquq Allah? And what makes something Huquq al-Ibad? And why is this the case? Like, what are the key factors? And why is it important to know that? Huquq Allah, when we're talking about Huquq Allah, there's some things which are common or the features of every single haqq of Allah, right? Every chapter that we read, which is Haqqullah, it has some common attributes. So for example, the primary purpose of all abwab or actions which are min huquqillah, they're primarily done for the akhirah, secondarily done for the dunya. What do I mean by that? When you perform salah, your salah is done for the akhirah, is there for success in terms of the akhirah. It's not, there's nothing in the dunya. I mean, of course, there's benefits. Every single hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has benefits in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. There's hikam and masalih, which might be zahir, which might not be zahir. They might be apparent, they might not be apparent. But there is no ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no command of sharia which is void and bereft of benefit. Everything has benefit. That's absolute. There's no denial of that. But sometimes things are more apparent than others. And that's why Imam Ghazali, I just remember Imam Ghazali rahimahullah wa radiya anh, he mentions that riba, when he was speaking about riba, that this is probably one of the most obscure, he mentions this. Imagine Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, in his time, he's mentioning that this is amongst the most obscure things where the maslaha and the hikmah of riba is still unknown. And only when he left fiqh and he went away into the jungles and he went away and, he had this kind of like break from all his work, did things started opening up to him. Riba being one of the most obscure things, and that's why even till today, articulating why riba is prohibited, it's very challenging if you don't know economics, if you don't know how the markets function and what's happening at the more macro level. It's very difficult. Like, the basic kind of arguments are there. Like, it's oppression, it's this and that. But at a macro level also, because riba is a system. Riba is not just a transaction, it's actually a system. Which stems from transactions. But things are obscure. So this is one example. But Ibadat, number one, primarily done for the akhirah. That you're doing it to get salvation in the akhirah. That's why we do Ibadat. Secondarily, there's benefit in the dunya. Number two, in every form of ibadah, you'll see Islam is a condition. right, for it to be accepted, because it's done for the akhirah. It's not done for the dunya. And in the akhirah, only those things which are performed by a Muslim have worth and value. So Islam is a condition. That's why your salah, your saum, your zakah, your hajj, all of this, Islam is a condition. Likewise, in every ibadah, intention, niyyah, is required. This is the third feature of ibadat. So when you perform salah, you need intention. You fast, you need intention. You give zakat, you need intention. You do hajj, intention, the talbiyah with your niyyah, right? You need that intention. Why is that the case? Because ibadah is being done for akhirah, you need something as a mumayyiz, as tamiz. How do you differentiate your worldly action from other worldly actions, from the ukhrawi actions or actions related to the akhirah? That's what niyyah does. Niyyah helps define a particular amal and kind of categorizes it for the akhirah. That's why niyyah is needed. Otherwise, you move up and down in your day-to-day, your world. You may be fixing something and you end up doing like a sajda almost, or you bow down, or you fold your arms or you raise your arms. It's mirroring and reflecting the postures of salah. But what makes it salah is your intention. Okay. And then the last point, I think the fourth point, is what makes Huquq Allah is that there can be no claim in a worldly court against you in Huquq Allah. Right? So salah, there's nobody who can make a claim against you. This person didn't perform salah or didn't do his dues. Likewise, even Sawm and Hajj, in Zakah. Yeah, there may be things related to this, but not directly for this. So that you have no counterparty against you. You're doing this solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your accountability is in the court of the hereafter when it comes to ibadat. Right? So these are the 4 points. Like, number 1, primarily for the akhirah. Number 2, Islam is a condition. Number 3, intention is required. And number 4, accountability and the court, quote unquote, is in the akhirah. Now let's look at Muamalat. Muamalat is different. How? Muamalat is primarily done for the dunya. You deal, you transact primarily to fulfill your worldly needs, and secondarily for the akhirah, meaning you get benefit also and reward in the akhirah. But aslan, the mawdu is for the akhirah. And that's why it's actually another point I forgot to add, is that the asal in ibadat is what? Tahrim. And the meaning, nobody can make up ibadat. Ibadat is what's been taught to us. Okay. But the asal in muamalat is ibaha. The asal in bay is hil, as is mentioned in Sharh al-Biqaya and other books. That the asal in bay is hil, that the default position in muamalat and buyu' is everything is permitted unless there's an evidence prohibiting it. Whereas in ibadat, everything, you can't make up an ibadah. The asal is mansus, it's nas, whatever it is, that's what you do, you just follow. If you start adding ibadah, that becomes bid'ah and it's muharram, it's not permissible. So that's a fifth point to consider. And given that this principle, that's why it makes sense and it's perfectly logical that muamalat is primarily for the dunya. And that's because everything is mubah for you. You're trying to fulfill your worldly needs. The world is ever evolving. The world is ever moving, and advances are always being made in technology and other areas. It has to be mubah. It has to be mubah so that people can fulfill their needs, as easy as possible, so that they can focus on the greater needs and the greater kind of objective in life, which is the akhirah. So muamalat is done primarily for your dunya and for your worldly needs, and secondarily for the akhirah. Number 2, the asal is hil in muamalat, in buyu'. It's not prohibited, rather everything is permissible unless there's a dalil. Number 3, Islam is not a condition. Right? Where in ibadat, Islam was a condition. In Huquq al-Ibad and Muamalat, Islam is not a condition. Therefore, you can transact with a Muslim, non-Muslim, you can buy from non-Muslims, you can employ non-Muslims. There's no need or there's no requirement for the person to be a Muslim. Number 4, we mentioned in Ibadat that intention is required. In Muamalat, when we go shopping, I don't think anybody makes an intention that I am going shopping to this particular store with this intention to buy this and this. Nobody does that. You walk in, you buy what you need, and you walk out, right? So intention is not required. Yeah, of course, if you want reward and all these things and you have good intentions, you'll be rewarded for that. But in terms of validity, in terms of like, acceptance, there's no need for this for an intention to be there. And then finally, I think the key point to understand is we mentioned in Ibadat that you don't have claims in the court, whereas in Huquq al-Ibad and Muamalat, it's a common feature that is claims. There are claims. You'll have claims in the worldly court. You'll have a counterparty. So in Buyu Muamalat, generally there's counterparties involved in the sense of people, whereas in Ibadat there's no counterparty as such involved. Yeah, there may be matters where you call to court, for example, moon sighting is a typical example where you're called into the qadi to say something, but it's not really that common it's just exceptional things here and there, which are needed to make the system and the order to continue to function properly. So that's really the difference between Huquq Allah and Huquq al-Ibad. I just want to share with you, before we read, I just want to make your minds understand where Buyu actually sits, right? So I'm just going to share a present, just like you can probably see the screen. So where does Buyu sit? Buyu sits in the very center. We have what's known as Islamic economics. So Islam is an economic system, right? An economic system is composed of various questions and various, every system of an economy is based on an ideology. So you have communism, capitalism, socialism. These are based on ideologies. The founders and the kind of those who pushed for these schools had particular ideologies which shaped these systems, and the systems are based on institutions and ideas and macro and micro kind of you could say mechanics. Islam also, of course, is an ideology. It has ideas. It's values based. It's embedded with values, and from an economic perspective, Islam also has a system. What makes the systems different? There's a few things, and this is just very rough for your benefit. One is the factors of production and how they are owned, distributed, and managed. Right. So the factors of production being land, labor, capital, enterprise, or entrepreneurship. These are all the resources are typically there in an economy. And so how the different systems, how they engage with these factors of production, who owns them, who decides, how they're managed, who produces them, where do the outputs go? That's what defines and makes each system somewhat different. So as an example, in the capitalist system, although capitalists say that they like to call themselves as free market economists, but there's no such thing as free markets really now. There's government intervention at every level and stage. So it's almost what we call mixed economies that we have now in the world, which means that government, the economists were of this view that government should not take part at all, this capitalist, that government should not take part at all unless necessary in the economy. The economy should be free from any intervention from the state, and it should be left to the people, to how they deal, what they want. So capitalism was on this idea that the owner of capital, to him belongs all benefits, to him belongs all produce, it's all his. You have it, it's yours. It's also like the American dream that exists. It's a land, it's an open land for opportunity. It's there for you. You can earn, you can do what you want. There's no kind of intervention, there's no barrier to entry. Any person who wants to come can come and build for themselves whatever they want, because you own the factors of production. It's your capital, it's your land, it's your labor, your enterprise. There'll be nobody controlling you, dictating to you. It's all yours, right? So everything, therefore, when it's all mine, the capitalist system and the state, the way it works is all mine. It's all about profit motive, profit maximization. How can I increase my benefit? It's all about my benefit. And that's why this philosophy runs through every operation. And that's why so many things are commoditized and commercialized. Everything is commoditized. You're just continuously looking for savings in the industry. So you'll exploit people. There'll be cheap labor. The dividends will be paid out to shareholders more and more because they own the capital. It's all about maximizing the people with the capital and favoring them over other people. There's no kind of concept of doing good to others or giving, because from a capitalist kind of philosophical perspective is they didn't have the capital in the first place. It's my capital, so why should I share with them? The opposite is communism, right? In socialism, there's a slight difference between communism and socialism. You can just read it online. Not major though. Socialism is a step to communism. The idea there was more about how the state controls, the state decides in terms of the resources, managing the resources, and distribution of the resources. Okay, and so it was more about state ownership. It wasn't about private ownership. It was neglected altogether. From an Islamic perspective, both are two extremes. Islam has a completely different system and setup. Islam recognizes private ownership. Islam recognizes the factors of production. But at the same time, where Islam is so beautiful and different is that it's not, Islam frames the entire discussion differently. That it's not you and your doing, it's Allah who's given something to you, right? Whatever you have, whatever capital you have, is from Allah. And given that it's from Allah, it's not your doing, it's Allah's blessing. And therefore, you should be using this in the way Allah is pleased with, and then giving it to whom Allah wants you to give it to, and distribute in a particular way. So the Islamic economic system is a system of its own. It has its own institutions. Every economy has institutions to make it function and work, like the capital markets and the banks and other entities. The Islamic economic system is similar. Why is this all important? Why am I mentioning all of this? To understand that buyu, what we read in Muamalat and buyu, is just the micro elements. The books of fiqh that we read, that was taking place within a system. We have to be very mindful of that. It was written and it was operating within a system, which is the Islamic economic system, right? How things function within that macro kind of umbrella. And that's what it reads to, and that's what there's dialogue with, the perfect system. And so sometimes when you're trying to apply, when you're looking at it from our perspective now, it might not always resonate because the system that we're working within and living within is somewhat different. Okay, and so that's why there seems to be this kind of tension, but there's no tension whatsoever. The lens at which the book was written and the lens which you should read this is from the Islamic economic system. Then it makes perfect sense. That doesn't mean fiqh is redundant today. It's not redundant at all. And that's why we have to understand why the fuqaha wrote what they wrote. Not what they wrote, but why they wrote what they wrote, which is key. When you read fiqh, it's not about what's been written. It's about why has been written this particular way, and what's the argument. We need to understand that more than simply what's just translation of the text. So anyway, that's just some kind of like, I'll say, some insights on economic systems. But here, as you can see, fiqh al-buyu is at the center. Buyu, then is mu'amalat. Mu'amalat is wider and greater than buyu, because mu'amalat also includes nikah and other matters, right? So buyu is a very specific, right? That's why they call this umum khusus min wajhin. Every buyu is mu'amalat, but not every mu'amalat is buyu. And then you have economics as a macro, where this is all tied into. So the buyu, when you read Kitab al-Buyu, it's not going to talk to you about systemic things to do with systems, things to developing a macro policy, a framework, a governance, kind of governance approach to things. It's talking very much to your person-to-person transaction. Because an economy, what is an economy at the end of the day? An economy is made up of millions of transactions. The cogs of an economy are transactions. That's why when the government it wants to kind of like spark the economy and wants the economy to function, what does it do? The stimulus is provided. What's the stimulus? Money is given so people can transact and invest and spend. They like to make people spend. When people spend, one person's expenditure is another person's income. And that's what sets the motion of the economy moving forward, right? So the idea is once these transactions begin to occur, the entire system, the money flows within the system. This is what the buyu and bay is. It's just these millions of micro mini transactions taking place within a whole. Why is it important to know about economics and the economic system? We can never understand the kind of like, I would say, the prophetic way of an economy if we don't understand at that level, where the person was so strategic in the way he set up the economy. So there's an entire kind of approach the Prophet had to the economy. The Prophet was honestly the greatest. He wasn't just a teacher. He was also an economist. He was also, that's why the ulama, he was the most intelligent of people. He truly was intelligent, truly was a genius. If you just look at his kind of when he came into Medina Munawwara after Hijrah, he for 14 days he stayed in the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiallahu an. What did he do? He was just networking, meeting people. Anybody who knows anything about business and finance and anything to do with organizations, you know the value of networking. So he just networked with the people. And then after that, he went to Banu Najjar and he approached them to buy the land himself. He went himself. He didn't send companions, himself. And he didn't order, he didn't give a price. He said, what's your price? How much would you sell this for? He himself went to find the market in Medina for the Muslims. Now, where should the market be? He went through 3-4 different locations and he found one location which had access to the outskirts of Medina and to the kind of like, you could say, the motorway and the highway to exit Medina and to enter Medina. So the way he was so meticulous, so detailed, was amazing. And, we can literally write a book on the prophetic economy and the prophetic strategy to economics. It's just so rich and so much there. So it's so important to know that, because if we want to implement buyu and muamalat, you have to understand the wider picture. You have to understand the more global discussions and wider discussions on this, right? So that's all I'd like to say on this, just to give you an understanding. And inshallah, wherever there's something which is beneficial for this class in terms of economics, inshallah, I'll share that with you all. But that's all I'd like to say on that. And going back to the kitab, so we just read that much. لما فرغ من حقوق الله تعالى الإبادات والعقوبات شرع في حقوق الإباد المعاملات. He finishes, and this is from the Sunan and earlier fuqaha and scholars in Muhaddithun, where they would write in a particular way with Tahara, Ibadat first, and then comes Muamalat. That's all there is to say on that. ومناسبته للوقف إزالة الملك لكن لا إلى مالك وهنا إليه فكان كبسيط ومركب. He's just making a simple point that, look, why is there munasaba between this and the chapter before it? The chapter before Buyu in Tanwir al-Absar is Waqf. What's the connection between the two? Straightforward. In one, it's Izalatul Milk, lakin la ila malik. When Waqf is made, the transfer of ownership is not taking place to any one particular person. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was of the view that Waqf property remains in the ownership of the Waqif, whereas Sahibain were of the view that Waqf property doesn't go to any particular person, it's fi hukm Allah ta'ala. Why do they say fi hukm Allah ta'ala when everything is really in the ownership of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's just to give it sacredness and sanctity. When something is then ascribed, the animals for Hajj, in Hajj and for Ihram, when people would take, they would say this is like an animal for Allah. So people would have such significance towards it and they would be very mindful of the animal. Similarly, this Waqf, because Waqf is sacred, this is somebody who's designated something for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's sacred. That sacredness and sanctity, it elevates when you say this is now owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a fear for a person to mess around with it and to usurp and abuse that particular property. So all he's saying that up there in Waqf, there's no real Malik, but here there is a counterparty in Buyu and Muamalat. That's inshallah will end here. جزاك الله خير. سبحانه وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك.